button there and do some introductions. So my name is Boyden Hodgson. I'm the Communications and Marketing Director for the ManKind Project USA, and I'll be hosting the call tonight. Michael Russer is feeling under the weather today, and I'm feeling him right now. And so I invited, in addition to John Grote, our Outreach NWTA specialist, who is always on these calls. Hi, John. Pleasure to see you.
Thank you, Boyden.
And I invited a very special guest, a man dear to my heart, Jan Hutchins, to come into the room with us tonight. Jan, I'm so stoked that you're here. And can we hear you? Nope, but I bet we can now. Hold on. Can I hear you now?
Yes, I think you can. Yeah,
there we go.
Yeah, I feel wonderful. Just fresh off an NWTA where obviously there was grief that turned to joy, so maybe there's something to say about that.
Awesome.
That's what I'm thinking is probably going to happen tonight. Yes, we'll talk about that. So, and to all you guys out there who have joined in, thank you. Welcome to the call. We're going to dive right in and get started. I have, see, it says 0000. So that means that I guess we have to go. So this came to me today. We were planning on talking about something else. And in the middle of a phone conversation that I had with Michael Russer when we were talking about kind of getting set up for the call tonight, a feeling of grief hit me. And it dawned on me that in the day that we're in and looking around and listening and seeing what's going on the news and hearing from personal people in my life close to me who are experiencing an incredible amount of loss, this was the right topic to bring to tonight's call. So the first question that I wanted to throw out that John and I bounced around with, so grief, what is this thing that we're talking about with grief? And John and I had a chance to play with this a little bit, but Jan, I haven't heard yours. What is grief for you?
Grief is an energy that I've defined as those letters and whatever meaning I've attached to them. It's usually an energy of extreme discomfort that I have different ways of holding, depending upon who I am at the time.
So, subjective.
Totally. And there's the whole recognition that grief is the portal, and I have to go through there to get back to the balance between that and joy, and it's painful, and for me, pain has changed its texture. Suffering is good. At the NWTA, a couple of the fellows after the weekend said, I was really amazed watching you during Guts because you were smiling all the time, even when something tragic was being recounted or the man was deep in the throes of his work. You were always smiling, and it speaks to what I see this as. Grief is the way to get to freedom. The heart that can stay open while it's breaking is exercise for the spiritual body.
Thank you. The heart that can stay open while it's breaking is exercise for the spiritual body. John, what do you got? Follow that.
I'm going to sort of expand upon that a little bit. Is what Jan said? It's that transition. It is something, in my opinion, we can't avoid, and the avoidance causes more pain. So it's hearing one man night talk about it's going to be his last night in his apartment, and so there's different kinds of grief. And for me, I've always just been in the death sort of grief, and sort of getting older and realizing that grief is transitioning from one stage to another and having to actually go through it and embody it and be with it instead of pushing it off, pushing it to the side, or and pretending it's not there. It's a feeling, it's an emotion. It brings up all the emotions. To get to something to go to the other side that is good, to get me somewhere else. Celebrating a life. If we want to talk about death, celebrating a life. At some point, taking me through that grief process, ending a relationship. What is on the other side of that bridge, and how to get there, how to share that pain and experience it, but be part of it, because you can't make it go away. This isn't something you cut out or ignore. And so now at the place of, okay, this is part of my journey.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I'm also convinced that there's something about this being together in community, actually having relational, limbic, sensitive connections with beings. So on an NWTA, one can express their grief at a depth that's greater because they're right there with all those relational supports to handle it. Frequently, if I'm alone, I have to come up with a whole different strategy, frequently involving tequila, to handle my limbic responses. But it is really, I think, a function of looking for connection. Why are we all on this call? What do we mean to one another? We are the connectivity that makes our lives worth living.
Yeah.
And we're already at that depth of connectivity that makes our lives worth living. Thank you. So I'm going to take us back up a little bit, just because some of the folks on the call here, this may be the first time that they've encountered this conceptual framework that we're laying out. Grief as something experienced, grief as something lived in community, grief as a relational, grief as a transition process to something else. So, and I'll model this one first. I remember, so the idea that in our culture, especially among boys and men, there is a lot of modeling that says that grief, sadness, we hear it as sadness first when we're little boys, but that grief and sadness are not okay.
Yeah.
It's not okay to go deep into that. And I can sit and remember, my parents divorced when I was 10. That was the first round of divorces in my life. And they just kind of kept going into my mid-20s, the divorces. And I remember distinctly, like, okay, hold it together, hold it together, hold it together. And that was the kind of frame and mask that I put on at 10 and 11 and wore consistently, into my late 20s, early 30s. Hold it together, hold it together, hold it together. Not to say that I didn't shed tears, not to say, that a sad movie wouldn't get to me or something would happen, but what I'm talking about is different than sadness. Like, I didn't grieve those big, big losses until I were shown the tools in community and saw what it looked like to experience that. Does that resonate? I see you're resonating with that, Jan. Does that resonate for you?
So totally. And it is because my response to my mother's death at 11 was as yours, to create a very specific, I will show you persona. I stood before the mirror and practiced talking a certain way and holding my face a certain way and picking the behaviors that would get me what I wanted, and became a magician at manipulation. All favorable and positive because I had good intentions. I love people, but it was to keep them at bay and have some control over this threat that people had come to represent. So I totally hear that, and it is this getting away from my notion that I'm taught that I have to be individually strong and powerful by myself.
Mm.
And that's a lie. It's so much a lie. I know it, no matter how much I tell myself. And then until I get into a community and I have the support and recognize I don't have to do it alone, it's the first time I can really do it.
Yeah, I see you. John, how does that sit with you?
Yeah, it sits with me in the fact of be a man. So that's, the first thing. Oh, didn't see my dad cry when my grandfather passed away. Really didn't see what that emotion was. So that's how I was taught. Okay, you can't be emotional. You can't, don't let them see you cry. So that sort of set up a lot of things in my life where, emotion got pushed to the back burner because I had to be strong and not knowing why. I mean, I think that was the one thing that took such a long time to get was why. Why be a man? Don't show your emotion. It's like, why? And like Jan said, being in a group of men, I can release that. It's such a release to go, oh, I'm with other men that get this, other men that can help me, other men that have been there, and to comfort me and to comfort other men. So the misnomer, the misconception of not dealing with it is a part of life. And unfortunately, I was taught that the part of life was just be a man about it. And especially when you're a kid, I mean, you see you see your mother or your grandmother or whatever relatives crying, and it's just like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
And to now go, oh, I know what's going on, and now I have all these emotions that, with the ManKind Project, I've been able to tap into and actually feel them instead of just stuffing them away.
Thank you. Thank you. You said something, and we've all kind of talked. So here we are talking about the ManKind Project. This is a ManKind Project call, and we've been talking about the new Warrior Training Adventure, which some of you guys on the phone definitely know what that is. Others of you may be just learning about it now for the first time. So, from a high altitude, the ManKind Project's New Warrior Training Adventure is a Friday to Sunday experiential training process. It's all men. If you are one of 30 participants, most of the weekends cap out at about 30 participants. There will be 40 to 50 to 60 staff there as leading the processes and taking you through the processes. And John, it rang when you just were talking about this, and Jan, the same thing. Like, what? I'm gonna let men see me do what? I'm gonna witness other men doing what? And I can't imagine now what that sounded like from the outside perspective, because it was so long ago for me when I started doing this. But say a little bit more about, like, what did it take for you? What was at risk for you to get past that mask and get past the armor to actually step into community for the first time to do this kind of work? John, why don't we start with you?
Trust.
What was at risk? Yeah.
Risking trust. And as you were going through that, I think my growing up, I was raised in a female household, so I think that even precipitated, being strong, because I didn't have anybody else to say, hey, look, it's okay to cry, it's okay to be vulnerable. So trusting that I could be in a space to sort of let my hair down, just to be me and know that I'm not going to be judged, that I'm going to be held and consoled, and somebody there that's going to love me just unconditionally. And men that haven't been through it, or men that have been through it, it's not a matter of either or, it's both.
Mm. So
for me to open my heart and just be in a group of men, in a circle of men, and just go and just let it all hang out. Like the first time, that was the first time that I really had that opportunity in my life, especially as an adult, just to let the pieces fall to the floor.
Thank you, John. That sounds hella risky, Jan. What do you have to say?
I was a lone wolf and an only child, and I had the big mother death wound, and so I was alone. And I was forced to notice. I had a yoga place in California, and one of the students there, two boys. The mother was telling me how hard it is, she thought, to raise a man in our world. I didn't know at the time, but her husband was an MKP guy. It turns out I get a call months later, and it's this woman asking me to drop everything and come to the hospital. They want to turn off the life support for one of her sons who had a brain aneurysm suddenly and died. He was on life support, and they wanted me to be there as sort of the cleric for the family. I barely knew these people, but that's how strong I think life was pulling me to this work. We finish, and as I'm walking out holding the little boy's hand, he looks up and he says, "See all those men? They're in my daddy's men's group. They're going to be at our house tomorrow. Please come." His brother, we were just life support. Okay. I got there, and it led to me to watching men sit in a circle and tell each other the truth. Holy Toledo. And this one fellow asked for someone who could help him with something, and 5 guys volunteered. Man, I don't have that in my life. And they were having fun. They were just having fun together. And I hadn't had fun with men since I was playing college sports. So it was obvious that I needed to do this, and I signed up almost immediately to go do the work. And my life had been a success externally, but not internally up to that point in my life.
Thank you. Thank you. For me, what was at risk, and this is one of those shadow sides, I had built an entire world around repressing all that grief. Pent up. And I knew it was there. My mom died in 2001, and it was just a couple of years later that I ended up at the New Warrior Training Adventure. So all the griefs that I had packed down, and so, what a magical thing, what an awesome thing I did to myself, that I used my grief as the armor.
Right.
I compressed it so hard in my body and in my life. And I got to say, when I finally ended up going to that place and going into that process, I was terrified that it was going to consume me.
Probably would have.
And I think that there's for some of us, there's that fear that if I actually start letting this out, I'm never going to come back from it. And one of the miracles, I'll say, one of the things that's been so powerful in my life is that opening that door up, that then became transition. I found my own gifts when I started being willing to do that processing work. Then I recognized, holy crap, I can be here for somebody else doing that. I started to discover what I was actually capable of that I don't think I was capable of before I started processing that in my own body. Earl threw a question in the window, and I think that this is great and a good transition point. Is there a kind of grief that happens in everyday life? For example, feeling helpless when dealing with asshole boss, stuff like that. Oh, good. I almost got a spit take out of Jan. That was yeah. Yes. Yes, there is. And here's the wonderful thing. When I've learned to process, as I've learned to process more fully, like all that big stuff that happened, the little stuff, I don't have to contain it anymore, and it becomes Jan, you've taught me some beautiful stuff about this. You've taught me some beautiful things about this. About and the Zen process has taught me some beautiful stuff about this. To just push it all out and to really let myself collapse. And Jan, you've talked about it as the zero state, getting back to the base, getting back to your zero state. And for me in everyday life, my everyday life involves an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old and parenting. And there's many griefs to carry through to carry through every week.
Gary.
and to have not only a way and method and tools to be able to process and let that stuff through me, but also a group of men that I can go sit with every 2 weeks. And if I got something big going on, I have a place that I can shout that out. I can shout that out and puke that out and cry that out and bawl that out. And saying that reminds me of, so my buddy Mike Rostowski did a brilliant couple of talks last year about crying his way to the top. And he said, you know, we don't expect you to hold your piss and shit in. Like, we expect you to process that and take care of yourself. Why do we expect anything different with tears? Like, from the day you were born, you had tears. And his thing, cry your way to the top. Stop judging it. And
that use of the vagus nerve is exercising your connection to all of your organs. That crying nerve is the thing that connects us.
And how's that feel when you have done that, Jan? How's it?
It's like I'm more alive. All that
cleansing
depression goes into deadening myself. And if I let go of it, I come back to life.
Back to life. Thank you. So we cruise through these half-an-hour sessions really fast. So I want to talk about I want to get to some of the shadows. So what do men do instead of grieving?
Porn!
There's a big one.
Any distraction, right?
Yeah.
Anger. Repressed anger.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think we should in this era leave out projecting.
Good. Talk about that.
I project my anger onto others, and if anyone around me is angry, I will judge them as being the world's worst person, and I think they deserve punishment and such. If anything, and I think almost all of our political stuff is this projection of grief. We're all so scared. We're all so scared. We're all so stressed out. We all just want to curl up in a ball and get we all need a big, what we used to do in all that hippie movement, a puppy pile. America needs a puppy pile. Everybody just lay down on the floor and hug each other for about an hour and a half every day for a month would start the process.
Hug it out.
Hug it out. There you go. And you said something that I think is key and resonates for me too about projecting. So projecting our grief. This is another place that guys can get stuck hanging out, right? So the constant, and then
over-identification.
Yeah, and over-identification, getting stuck in that and projecting, my unprocessed grief onto everything and everyone around me.
This fellow who was talking about his apartment, another way of looking at that is, yes, it's sad that I'm about to leave here, but I could have a party there and invite the people who'd been meaningful while I was in that apartment, or just have a whole shamanic deal with the energies that I'd put in the apartment and celebrate the situation. We turn frequently to grief because we've been hurt so much so often. It's one of those limbic processes that's stuck in us from childhood that we will fall into our grief and our sadness. And it hurts more because when we fall in, we lose any sense of, I have some ability to respond to this in a way that would allow me to right the ship by letting go and other exercises, by finding things that I know feed me and going and getting those, even if it's tequila, in limits. Sorry, I have to do politically correct. And that's an option that doesn't seem to be there because we fall into our grief rather than just experiencing it.
Thank you. And one distinction that I read from someone else is that grief's not something you get over. Grief is something that you move through, that you move with, right?
It's in charge, not me.
And Dan, you said something. Yeah, it's in charge, not me. And it's something. It's partner. We're holding hands with it as we're walking along with it. And you said something earlier that what comes after that is that aliveness, that joy, access to joy, right? When I left my last house before moving here, house totally empty. Last walkthrough, broom clean. I walked through with Sage and cried in every room and experienced the joy of all the beautiful memories that I had built, everything in that house that had led me to here. And there was grieving, as in letting go, but also that deep joy in there. I see you, Richard. So Richard Stewart said, would love to be able to do a weekend just to process grief. Come on down. Stephen Winters, what's the difference between grief and a deep sadness? Got a distinction there?
How far one has fallen or chosen to allow oneself to fall? I think the words define it. It's a feeling. It's a sensation. And if I put the word grief on it, I have expectations I should behave a certain way because of that. Compared to if I said it was deep sadness, I might behave in a slightly different or a significantly different way. So I get to have much more control over how much I suffer about it, but I don't really get to change the sensations there.
Beautiful. We talk about this idea of mythopoesis. That's a mythopoetic men's work that we do. Mythos, the big story that we tell ourselves. And the distinction that I would draw between deep sadness and grief is the depth of the story surrounding. And part of our work is around rewriting our stories, is around speaking and telling those stories, processing what's happening in our bodies from those stories, with those stories, and then being able to see from a different perspective, which allows us to move.
Beautifully said.
Yeah. Beautiful. Jeremy, Golden Grizzly, I spent 10 years pushing down my grief over my mom's cancer. I wasn't able to let it out until I found my tribe. I let grief steer me into escaping. Beautiful. Richard Stewart, the Grief Recovery Manual is a good read. I will look that up. Once I let myself, with the support of other men, experience my grief, I began to experience my joy. Thank you. Many of us have grief on top of grief on top of grief. Yes, that's very well said, Richard. And we bucketing. So how much are you going to lift today? So we're going to take out this 10 buckets today. Maybe tomorrow we only have enough energy for 2 buckets. And our energy continues to come. So it's 9:32. So for you men who have been on the call, I think that I kind of covered everything that was in the Q&A, and we covered the chat messages here. So John Grote, who's this guy on the call right here, is the NWTA outreach specialist. Are there other words men might use to describe their grief? Yes, I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are lots of them. And I warn myself against overcomplicating things and letting it be simple. Letting it be simple so I can move through it. So John Grote, if you would like to meet this dude named John Grote and learn more about the NWTA, see where there's one close to you, ask any specific questions. We didn't cover anything to do with logistics about the weekend here. We just talked about what we wanted to talk about here. John's the man. There's a thing, meetme.so/NWTA. You can schedule a time to speak with John. You can also email him, outreach@mkp.org. And I'm going to show us, I'm going to go to the last page here and show us a handful of countdown timers. So these are upcoming weekends just in the next 6 weeks. So from New England to Georgia to Ontario, Canada, Chicago, Kentucky, Texas outside Houston, Santa Barbara. There are weekends, we do over 125 New Warrior Training Adventure weekends in a year around the world. This is a process that is going to, this is a process that gave me tools to do what I never thought possible in my life and gave me a community of men to do it with. And you're invited. And that is the end of our presentation for tonight. I thank you guys for being here. Jan, it was lovely to dance with you. John, thanks
Always.
for being here.
Thank you, Jan.
Men, and blessings. Take care. Have a great night.